Hello everyone, welcome to another new class of human physiology. We are almost in our last class of human physiology. So this was like a long journey with you. So today you will be the last class and we will discuss about the neurological disorder. So we will see like what different type of disease can happen in our nervous system, and then let's see how their physiology is. So let's stay with it. So what different concepts will be covered for today's class? We will discuss about different neurological disorder, what is neurological disorder, what are their different physiological changes associated with, we will see what are their symptoms, then few diseases will focus, for example Alzheimer, Parkinson, stroke, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and cerebral palsy. So let's go one by one and see what happens exactly in cases of this disorder. So to start with, in terms of like the neurological disorder, these are like a group of conditions that affect like our brain, spinal cord along with our nerve. And when it affects, it can disrupt the nervous system functions, leading to different type of wide range of symptoms, mainly the abnormal symptom. These disorders can be caused by different factor. It can be genetic factor, it can be like various sort of like bacterial viral infections, it can happen due to like different type of injuries or environmental toxins or factor, and it can affect from like all group of age. And why it is important to kind of understand different type of neurological disorder for developing treatments related to this type of diseases. So unless we understand the physiology and general details of this neurological disorder, the treatments cannot be focusedly developed regarding this disease. So it is very important to know about, at least to have a basic knowledge about this neurological disorder. So what common symptoms are associated with neurological disorder? For example, in cases of motor symptom, we will observe like muscle weakness or paralysis. Apart from that, we can see tremors or involuntary movements. Stiffness or rigidity can also be seen. Seizures also can be observed. In cases of sensory symptom, we can observe like numbness or tingling, mainly sometime like in top of like the fingers and the toes. There can be response of pain, it can be acute or chronic pain symptom. Apart from that, changes in vision, hearing, taste or smell can also be seen. In cases of cognitive and psychological symptom, memory loss or confusion can be seen. Apart from that, difficulty with speech or language can be observed. Other than that, changes in mood and behavior and impaired cognitive function can also be observed. So these are all different type of motor symptoms, sensory symptoms along with cognitive and psychological symptoms that can be seen. So the first one, the very important one we will discuss is about the Alzheimer disease. And what is the reason for Alzheimer disease? Because it is caused by the abnormal buildup of protein, mostly the amyloid protein, amyloid plaques and the tau tangles. These are like some group of aggregated type of protein. If these proteins are aggregated in the brain, that can damages and destroys the nerve cell. Genetic relations are present with the Alzheimer disease, but apart from that, lifestyle, environmental factors, food habits can also affect. Mostly it affects primarily the cerebral cortex, particularly the area where the memory and cognitive function are done. Symptoms can associated with the memory loss, especially like short-term memory loss. It can also have like a confusion and disorientation type of symptom. Apart from that, difficulties with language, communication, impaired judgment and decision making can also be a challenge. Basically, there is no proper treatment or complete treatment for the Alzheimer, but there are different drugs and medications that can manage the further progression and condition of Alzheimer disease. So as we said that the main reason behind the Alzheimer was like the amyloid plaque and the tau tangle formation. So basically the amyloid plaques are primarily made of the beta amyloid fragment, and these fragments are produced when a larger protein, which is called as APP or the amyloid precursor protein, is basically cut by different enzymes, for example like beta secretase and gamma secretase. These are normal kind of function, like generally this type of protein, this APP protein, during the process and enzyme kind of degradation, it forms the beta amyloid fragment. But we have like a natural process also in body to basically destroy or eliminate or remove these beta amyloid fragments, so that it does not create any neurological disturbance. But in cases of disease condition, for example the Alzheimer condition, this cleavage process or elimination process is altered. This basically leads to overproduction of the stickier forms of amyloid beta. And now this stickier form of amyloid beta, these are more prone to clumping together. Okay. So basically what happens is like this cleavage process, which is cut by cut from the APP by the enzymes called beta secretase and gamma secretase, this gets altered, and during the alteration of this cleavage it start to form more and more amyloid beta, and this amyloid beta then gets much more stickier, and it creates lot of neurological issue, because it also has like a impaired clearance, right. As we already said that normally brain has a mechanism to clear the amyloid beta fragments, but in case of Alzheimer it is unable to remove those clustered or kind of stickier amyloid beta fragment, and it can also associated with tau protein abnormality. So basically in cases of Alzheimer, tau undergoes abnormal chemical changes, for example excessive phosphorylation or hyperphosphorylation. This can cause tau to detach from the microtubule and clump together, generally forming the neurofibrillary tangles inside the neuron. So these are like different situation. Mostly you can see how the amyloid beta fragments or the plaque can form. Apart from that, the tau tangle formation can also cause Alzheimer. Next one we will discuss, which is the stroke, and as you know, like it can happen if like the blood flow to the brain is interrupted. So basically stroke can be of two types. It can be of ischemic stroke or it can be of hemorrhagic stroke, right. So in case proper blood flow gets obstructed in the brain, it can build up the pressure and it can create a brain stroke, further causing damage to the local tissues and the nerve. And what we just tell that it has two type of basically condition. One is the ischemic stroke, where there is a presence of blood clot. So you can see that in case of ischemic stroke there is a presence of blood clot, and this can basically prevent like proper blood flow. And there can be hemorrhagic type of stroke, where you can see there is a rupture of the blood vessel causing like lot of bleeding inside of the brain, and due to that also there can be challenges in terms of proper blood flow in the brain causing stroke. What would be the symptoms if stroke happens? Basically sudden numbness can be observed, or weakness of the face, arm, leg can be seen, and it can also cause dizziness, trouble in speaking, sudden vision change and imbalance, and in severe cases patient can go to like complete senseless condition with like possibility of coma. Treatment can be like emergency medical care should be immediately obtained. In cases of ischemic related stroke, clot dissolving drug, for example tissue plasminogen activator or the TPA, right. So basically tissue plasminogen activator can be used. Different type of like thrombus dissolution reagent can be used. In case of hemorrhagic stroke, we can like prescribe certain drugs to control the bleeding, and further like surgical removal of the clots or like surgical repair of those bleeding area can be also done. But to get back to like the normal speech, normal response and senses, rehabilitation type of therapy including physical therapy, speech therapy can be recommended by the doctor. Next condition is called migraine, which is basically a complex neurological condition that involves different changes in the brain activity, blood flow and the nerve signaling. It triggers can include like stress, hormonal changes and certain foods and environmental factors. What would be different symptom you can see? It can be like very intense and throbbing type of headache, including like nausea and vomiting. Apart from that, sensitivity to light and sound can be seen. Treatments can be given as like in form of pain reliever. Apart from that, preventing medication, for example beta blocker, can also be given. The next disease we will discuss is about epilepsy. Mostly why epilepsy has been seen, which is like characterized by recurrent seizures. Generally it is caused by abnormal electrical activity inside of our brain. It can be caused by either genetic factor or like environmental factor or different type of developmental abnormality. Apart from that, injury, infections can also cause epilepsy. Mostly frequent seizures it can be seen. Along with that, loss of consciousness, convulsions can also be observed. Treatment can be given in terms of like anticonvulsant medication. Apart from that, surgery sometimes can be helpful. The next disease we will discuss, which is the Parkinson disease. So basically in case of Parkinson disease, which is a progressive disorder, it has been seen that there is a relation with the loss of dopamine producing nerve cells. So dopamine, as we know, this is like a neurotransmitter and it has lot of role in the body. Dopamine also is a hormone, of course. So in case of Parkinson, dopamine producing nerve cells get destroyed, and where it affects, if you see like the primarily it affects the basal ganglia, brain region involved in the movement control. So what would be like different type of symptom? You will see like tremors often at rest. So these are like tremor in the body without even like any stimulation. You can see during rest. Muscle rigidity can be seen, slowed movement can be seen. Okay. Treatment, basically there is no cure although, but certain medications like dopamine agonists can be given to manage the condition. And also recently deep brain stimulation or the DBS can also be tried. So you can see like this in case of Parkinson, there can be challenges in terms of like voluntary movement production, there can be challenges with cognition, memory learning, motivation, emotion, perception, right, and there can also be challenges in cases of like sensory processing, hormonal regulation, right, along with maternal nurturing. So there are so much of issues can be associated with the Parkinson disease. And how basically this disease is progress. So if you see like alpha synuclein, which is like a protein that normally exists in a soluble unfolded state. So basically alpha synuclein, it generally normally exists in a soluble state, but what happens in case of Parkinson, due to genetic mutation, oxidative stress and other like unknown trigger, these proteins become misfolded and adopt abnormal shape. Okay. So basically due to this reason of like alpha synuclein, which basically becomes like misfolded, along with that it adopt abnormal shape. And what happens after the misfolding? The misfolded alpha synuclein proteins have a tendency to aggregate. So basically this protein, although it was initially like soluble, due to the abnormality, it can be due to genetic changes, oxidative stress, they started to misfold and now they are more like of aggregated form. And this aggregated form, eventually they become like a cluster, and which is called as Lewy body. Dopaminergic neuron, basically, which are particularly those present in the substantia nigra, these have a high firing rate and metabolic demand. This makes them more susceptible to the oxidative stress, which can promote the alpha synuclein misfolding and aggregation. Okay. So this basically dopaminergic neuron, this can have these are highly susceptible to reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress, causing like a risk of alpha synuclein aggregation. Apart from that, neuromelanin, which is also like a pigment in neuron, this also can react with alpha synuclein to promote Parkinson disease. So basically, as you can see, that due to this aggregation of alpha synuclein, it starts to damage the dopamine receptor based neuron, causing like lot of challenges mostly in the motor related activity. Then the next disease we will discuss, which is about the traumatic brain injury or the TBI. Basically, it is caused by a sudden impact or jolt to the head. It can be due to some injury. Mainly the cause can be like in cases of car accident or fall, like sport related injuries. The symptom can be of headache, dizziness, confusion, convulsion. Treatment can be given in terms of emergency medical care, surgery and rehabilitation. Then the next one we will discuss, which is about multiple sclerosis. In these cases, autoimmune related activation happens in the brain. So you can see it can be like due to many reasons. Autoimmune disease can be of many reasons, and it's very difficult to predict why the autoimmune diseases are triggered. But you can see like in these cases, like both T cells and B cells, they penetrate the BBB, and the T cells, B cells can react to produce antibody. T cells and microglia cells also can react to produce antibody, and these antibodies basically and the cytokines, these are mostly related to pro-inflammatory cytokines that starts to destroy the filaments, this like the so as you can see that these T cells and B cells can produce antibody, along with that the T cells and microglia cells can produce like antibody and cytokines, and these are mostly like the inflammatory type of molecules, and these inflammatory molecules can destroy the myelin sheath along with the neuron. So basically it degenerates the myelin sheath, it degenerates the neuron. In this way we can observe like symptoms like fatigues, numbness or tingling. We can also observe muscle weakness and difficulty with balance and coordination. So basically if the myelin sheaths are degenerated, what we will observe, the conduction speed will decrease. So basically the electrical conduction speed, the speed of electrical conduction will decrease. The next one we will discuss a condition called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or ALS. This is basically a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects motor neurons, leading to muscle weakness and paralysis. Where it affects, if you see, it mostly affects the motor neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. In terms of symptom, you will see like muscle weakness in limbs, and slowly it starts to spread. Apart from that, muscle twitching, muscle cramps can also be seen. Along with that, slurred speech, difficulty in swallowing, breathing can also be observed. Basically till now there is no treatment, because many cases of ALS we will see there is a genetic disease causing like misfolded protein production or non-functional protein production, progressing this disease, and unless like those genetic correction can be done, this disease is very difficult to control. But some medications like riluzole, this type of medications can be given in terms of not prevention but managing the condition. Apart from that, supportive care can be given. But very recently lot of like genetic therapy, so like lot of modern therapy like genetic therapy, cell based therapy, these therapies can be adopted, but none of them are till now clinically approved. So none of them are till now clinically approved, but with the gene therapy, for example like CRISPR, we can remove the faulty genes. With the cell therapy, what we can do, we can create like a functional protein out of like external cells, so that those functional protein can restore back the functions in case of ALS. And as you can see that ALS is a group of disease that can be affected by various genes. So for example like SOD gene or superoxide dismutase gene can get altered where it can affect the astrocyte. The superoxide dismutase gene alteration can also affect like microglia function. It can also affect like the oligodendrocyte function. Apart from that, you can see C9orf72, which is another important genetic mutation that has been very frequently seen in case of ALS, that also hampers like the glial function. There are lot of other related genes also, for example SBG11, TUBA, 4A, PFN1, DCT1, PRPH, NEFH. So many genes are basically affected during ALS, and certain genes can either affect astrocyte. For example, the mutation of SOD1 that creates an environment of neuronal hyperexcitability. So neurons are always in an excited condition, and it potentially basically through an impaired glutamate regulation. So in this case, if the SOD1 mutation happens, astrocytes will create a condition of hyperexcitability of the neuron. Then in cases of SOD1 or the C9orf72 gene mutation, we can see like the microglia dysfunction, where activated microglia that can contribute to the neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. Apart from that, mutation in several genes, for example SOD1 and other, can cause like a abnormalities in the oligodendrocyte. It can also cause axonal degeneration or a condition called axonopathy. So you can see like so many genes and so many conditions are correlated with the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And Stephen Hawking, you have heard of Stephen Hawking, he was like he suffered a long time with this disease, which is ALS or the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So now we will discuss about the Huntington's disease, which is basically an inherited genetic disorder that happens by the genetic mutations of the HTT gene that provides instructions for making a protein called Huntingtin. And you know what is the role of Huntingtin? It is very important in terms of neuronal development and neuronal transport. Okay, so basically whenever there is this mutation in HTT gene, this protein Huntingtin, which has important role in neuron development and neuronal transport, will not be properly formed, and the function will be severely impaired, causing like involuntary movements, cognitive decline. Basically there is no treatment, but same way like gene therapy or cell-based therapy can be employed. These are modern approaches of the therapy, but none of them are yet clinically approved. Lastly, we will discuss about cerebral palsy, which is basically a group of disorder caused by abnormal brain development or damage. It can occur before or during or shortly after the birth. Symptoms basically can have like muscle weakness or stiffness, lack of coordination, involuntary movements and difficulties with walking. And there are basically no cure, but different therapies can be given to improve the function of the brain and quality of life. Apart from that, occupational and speech therapy can also be given. So do you know that stroke is a leading cause of death and disability worldwide? Like each in 4 person we'll see like 1 person will be affected by the stroke, and like every day like so many cases of stroke has been continuously arising. Do you know that Alzheimer disease is the most common cause of dementia? Dementia is a broader term for the decline in the cognitive function. So in cases of like if a patient is suffering from either stroke, Alzheimer, Parkinson, the cognitive function may get decreased, and dementia is basically associated with a broader term if a patient is suffering from decline in the cognitive function. So activity question, what do you think like the brain disease has limited treatment and therapy? Can you tell? Because we discussed for various organ in our body, last 12 weeks we are discussing about different diseases, different treatment options. We saw like how the disease affect those organs, but we also kind of discussed that there are many therapies present for all those organs. But in case of brain, the therapies are so limited. You remember like all these last few slides we discussed, one thing I was kind of continuously telling that there is no treatment or no cure, or even if there are certain treatment, this is just for like improving the condition in a limited way, but there are no complete cure for many of these neurological disorder. So can you tell what is the main reason for it? So thank you again for attending today's class of human physiology. If you have further question, please send us your question by email, or you can also discuss during the live sessions. So we are at the end of today, like the whole 12 week of class. Hopefully you enjoyed the whole syllabus of human physiology. We thoroughly covered like various organs and various part of our body. We try to saw like starting from brain, heart, lung, different endocrine glands, our overall like neurological systems we discussed about skeletal system. Apart from that, we thoroughly discussed about reproductive systems of male and female. We also discussed about like the excretory pathways. So hopefully it would be helpful for all of you, and if you kind of go through this 12 weeks of class, I hope that you will be able to learn many things that would be useful for you whole over your life. Thank you again for staying with us. Thank you again. So thank you, and we'll end our course here.